The shadow of death hung over the modest homestead as Beatrice Taylor cradled her 6-year-old son, Samuel, in her trembling arms, his small body burning with fever that had raged for 3 days, his breaths coming in shallow, raspy gasps that tore at her heart. Silver Peak, Colorado, 1878. A town that had promised her a fresh start after her husband's death 2 years prior now seemed as cold and unforgiving as the mountain winds that howled outside her window. "Please, Sammy, hold on," Beatrice whispered, pressing her lips to his forehead, the heat of his skin frightening her more with each passing hour. Her hand brushed back his sweat-dampened hair as his small chest labored for breath. The pneumonia had come on suddenly, striking her boy down in the middle of playing with the neighbor children just days ago. Now he lay fighting for his life. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when Beatrice wrapped Samuel in a woolen blanket and carried him the half-mile into town. Silver Peak wasn't much a collection of wooden buildings strung along a dusty main street, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines and silver-rich mountains that had given the town its name. But it had one thing her homestead lacked: a doctor. Dr. Hiram Wells had arrived in Silver Peak 3 years earlier, bringing with him fancy medical instruments from back east, and an air of superiority that most folks tolerated because he was the only physician for 50 miles. His office stood at the far end of Main Street, a well-kept building with actual glass windows, a luxury in these parts. Beatrice's boots kicked up dust as she hurried down the street, her arms aching from carrying Samuel, but her determination never wavering. A few early risers nodded in greeting, their expressions turning to concern at the sight of the bundle in her arms. "Morning, Mrs. Taylor," called Martha from the general store's porch. "Is that young Samuel? Is he poorly?" Beatrice couldn't spare the breath to answer, merely nodding as she continued her desperate march toward the doctor's office. The sign on Dr. Wells' door read, "Office hours 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., though Beatrice knew full well that the doctor kept to his own schedule, especially when it came to certain patients. She shifted Samuel's weight to one arm and rapped firmly on the door. No answer came. She knocked again, harder this time, the wood rattling in its frame. "Dr. Wells, please, it's Beatrice Taylor. My boy is terribly sick." The curtain in the window twitched, and Beatrice caught a glimpse of the doctor's face before it disappeared. Hope surged in her chest. A moment later, the door opened a crack, revealing Dr. Wells in his nightshirt, his graying hair disheveled from sleep. His eyes narrowed as they fell on Beatrice. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice flat. "It's barely 7 in the morning. I apologize for the hour, doctor, but Samuel has taken a terrible turn. He's burning with fever, and his breathing—" Her voice caught. "I fear it's pneumonia." Dr. Wells's gaze flicked to the child in her arms, then back to her face. His expression remained unmoved. "I see. And how do you plan to pay for my services this time?" The question struck her like a physical blow. I have some money saved. Not much, but—" "Not much indeed." Dr. Wells cut her off. "You still owe me for treating your headaches last winter, $3.50 as I recall. And I intend to pay it, doctor, as soon as the vegetable crop comes in. Please, this is my son." Dr. Wells crossed his arms. "Mrs. Taylor, this is a business, not a charity. Silver Peak has been generous enough to you already, taking you in after your husband's passing. The Ladies' Aid Society furnished your cabin, and Mr. Peterson gives you credit at the general store." Heat rushed to Beatrice's cheeks. "I work hard for what I have, doctor. I've never asked for handouts. And yet, here you are, asking for my services with no means to pay for them." His eyes were cold. "Perhaps if you'd accepted one of the marriage proposals you've received, you wouldn't be in this position." A woman alone can't manage in these territories. The cruel words stung, but Beatrice refused to let them distract her from what mattered. "Please, Dr. Wells, look at him. He's so small. I'll work off the debt. I can clean your office, do your laundry, anything." For a moment, something like hesitation crossed the doctor's face as he looked at Samuel's flushed features. Then his expression hardened again. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Taylor, but I have patients who can pay waiting for my attention. There's a woman in town who knows something of herbs, Mrs. Carpenter. Perhaps she can offer you some remedy." He began to close the door. "Good day." "Wait!" Beatrice cried, desperation making her bold. She wedged her foot in the door. "You took an oath. You can't turn away a dying child." Dr. Wells's face reddened. "Remove your foot from my door, Mrs. Taylor, or I'll call for the sheriff. I decide whom I treat and when. Your boy's illness is unfortunate, but it's not my concern if you can't pay." With that, he shoved the door hard enough to force her foot back, and the heavy oak slammed shut in her face. Beatrice stood there, stunned into silence, as tears welled in her eyes. Samuel whimpered in her arms, the sound jolting her back to reality. "Shh, my love," she whispered, though her own voice shook. "We'll find help elsewhere." She turned away from the doctor's door, her mind racing. Mrs. Carpenter was indeed knowledgeable about herbs, but Beatrice had already tried her remedies, the honeysuckle tea, the mustard plasters, the steam treatments with pine needles. Nothing had broken Samuel's fever or eased his breathing. As she walked back down Main Street, the town was coming to life. The blacksmith's hammer rang out, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Normal life continuing while her world threatened to collapse. "Mrs. Taylor?" Beatrice turned to find Sheriff Thomas approaching, concern etched on his weathered face. "Sheriff?" she acknowledged, shifting Samuel in her arms. "The boy's not well?" he asked, nodding toward Samuel. "No, sir. Dr. Wells." She couldn't finish the sentence, shame and anger tangling in her throat. The sheriff's expression darkened with understanding. "Wouldn't see him, eh?" He shook his head. "That man's forgotten what it means to be a healer. I've half a mind to—" He stopped himself, seeming to remember his position. "Is there anything I can do?" Beatrice hesitated, then asked, "Is there another doctor anywhere nearby?" The sheriff scratched his beard. "Nearest proper doctor's in Silverton. Good 3 days' ride from here." He studied her face. "But that's a hard journey with a sick child, Mrs. Taylor." "What choice do I have?" Despair crept into her voice. The sheriff's eyes softened. "Let me ask around. Someone might know of someone closer." He touched the brim of his hat. "Take the boy home and keep him comfortable. I'll stop by later." Beatrice nodded, grateful for even this small kindness. "Thank you, Sheriff." She made her way back to her homestead, a simple 2-room cabin with a vegetable garden out back and a small chicken coop. It wasn't much, but it was hers paid for with the money Daniel had left her and the sweat of her own brow over the last 2 years. Inside, she laid Samuel on his bed and refreshed the cool cloth on his forehead. His breathing seemed worse now, each inhale a struggle that made her own chest tighten in sympathy. "Mama's here," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he could hear her through the fever. "Mama's going to make you better." But how? The question haunted her as she moved around the cabin, stoking the fire and preparing another batch of Mrs. Carpenter's tea, though she held little hope for it now. Without proper medicine, without a doctor's care. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Hoping it might be the sheriff with news, she hurried to answer it. Instead, she found Nick Jameson standing on her porch, hat in hand. The sight of him sent an unexpected flutter through her chest, despite her worry. Nick Jameson had arrived in Silver Peak 6 months ago, bringing with him little more than his horse, his saddle, and a reputation as a skilled horseman and tracker. He'd taken work at the Peterson Ranch outside town, breaking horses and helping with the cattle. At 32, he was quiet but kind, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. They'd spoken a handful of times when he'd come into town, exchanged pleasantries when they'd crossed paths. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, nodding slightly. "Sheriff Thomas mentioned your boy's taken ill." "Yes," she confirmed, wondering why the sheriff had sent him of all people. "And the doctor won't see him." It wasn't a question. "No, he remembered I still owe him for a previous treatment." The admission cost her pride, but there wasn't time for that now. Nick's jaw tightened. "That's not right." He glanced past her, into the cabin. "How's the boy doing?" "Not well," she admitted, her voice threatening to break. "His fever's rising, and his breathing. I'm afraid for him, Mr. Jameson." Nick nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Sheriff says the nearest doctor's in Silverton." "That's what he told me as well. 3 days' ride, if the weather holds and nothing goes wrong." His eyes met hers directly. "Mrs. Taylor, I know we don't know each other well, but I'd like to help. I could ride to Silverton, bring the doctor back." The offer took her breath away. "Mr. Jameson, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering." His voice was firm. "No child should suffer because of money, and no mother should have to watch it happen." Something in his tone made Beatrice wonder about his past, but now wasn't the time to ask. It would be dangerous, riding hard like that. "I've made tougher rides," he shrugged, as if dismissing the difficulty. "The real question is whether your boy can hold on for 6 days, 3 there, 3 back." The stark reality of it made her throat tighten. I don't know." Nick seemed to come to a decision. "There's another option. I could take him with me." "What?" The suggestion startled her. "I can travel faster than any doctor coming this way. If I take Samuel, get him to Silverton sooner." He paused. "It's risky, I know. The journey would be hard on him, but waiting might be worse." Beatrice looked back at Samuel's small form on the bed, listening to his labored breathing. The thought of sending him away terrified her, but Nick was right. Waiting could mean losing him. "I'd go too, but you have the homestead," Nick finished for her, "and the journey would be slower with both of you." She nodded, tears welling up again. "I'll keep him safe, Mrs. Taylor." The promise in his voice was absolute. "I give you my word." "When would you leave?" she asked, the decision forming even as fear clutched at her heart. "Immediately. I'll need to stop by the ranch for supplies, but I can be back here within the hour." Beatrice took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Then I'll have him ready." Nick nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "1 hour?" He turned to go, then paused. "He's going to be all right, Mrs. Taylor. I promise you that." As she watched him stride toward his horse, Beatrice felt something she hadn't experienced in days' hope. True to his word, Nick returned within the hour, his saddlebags packed with supplies. He'd brought a second horse as well, a gentle mare. "She's steady," he explained as he dismounted. "We'll rig a carrier between the horses. Samuel will ride with me during the day, but at night we can lay him flat between the mounts. It'll be easier on him." Beatrice marveled at the thoughtfulness of this preparation. "You've done this before?" A shadow passed over Nick's face. "Once. During the war." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. Together, they prepared for the journey. Beatrice packed what medicines she had: willow bark for fever, honey for his throat. She wrapped Samuel in his warmest clothes and the quilt she'd made for his birthday last year, each stitch sewn with love. When it came time to hand her son over, Beatrice found herself frozen, unable to let go. "Mrs. Taylor," Nick said gently. "Beatrice, I'll bring him back to you." The use of her first name, spoken with such certainty, broke through her fear. Carefully, she passed Samuel into Nick's strong arms, watching as he cradled the boy with unexpected tenderness. "There's a good lad," Nick murmured as Samuel stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. Nick secured Samuel against his chest with a length of cloth, creating a sling that would hold the boy safely as they rode. Then he mounted his stallion with practiced ease, barely jostling the child. 3 days to Silverton," he said, looking down at Beatrice. "Maybe less if we're fortunate." Beatrice nodded, fighting back tears. "Godspeed, Mr. Jameson." "Nick," he corrected her. "After all this, I reckon we should use first names." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Nick, then, and Godspeed." With a nod, he turned his horse, the mare following on a lead. Beatrice stood in her doorway, watching until they disappeared into the pines, taking her heart with them. The first day of their absence was the longest of Beatrice's life. She threw herself into chores, cleaning the cabin from top to bottom, weeding the garden until her fingers were raw. Anything to keep her mind from wandering to all the dangers the wilderness held for a sick child and a lone rider. Sheriff Thomas stopped by that evening, bringing with him a casserole from his wife. "Any word?" she asked, though she knew it was too soon. "Not yet," he said, setting the dish on her table. "But Nick Jameson's the best rider in the county. If anyone can make it to Silverton in good time, it's him." "You know him well?" Beatrice couldn't help asking. The sheriff considered this. "Well enough. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's a good man. Fought for the Union, came west after the war like many did. Been drifting until he landed here. He paused. Lost his family in the war, from what little he's said. Wife and child to fever, if I recall correctly. The revelation struck Beatrice hard. No wonder he'd been so determined to help Samuel. He knew the pain of losing a child to illness. "I didn't know," she said softly. "He doesn't talk about it. Most men don't." The sheriff headed for the door. "Try not to worry too much, Mrs. Taylor. Your boy's in good hands." After he left, Beatrice sat at her table, pushing the food around her plate without eating. Outside, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery hues. Somewhere out there, Nick was making camp, tending to her son. She closed her eyes and prayed they were safe. The miles stretched endlessly before Nick as he guided his horses through the rugged terrain. The first day had been the hardest, with Samuel drifting in and out of consciousness, his small body radiating heat that Nick could feel through his own shirt. They'd made good time, despite the burden, following the old mining trail that cut through the mountains. Nick knew these paths well, had traveled them alone many times. But never with such precious cargo, never with such urgency driving each step. As dusk approached, he found a sheltered spot near a creek to make camp. Carefully, he dismounted. Supporting Samuel's weight as he slid from the saddle, the boy stirred, his eyes opening briefly. "Mama," he whispered, voice raspy. "No, son. It's Nick. Your mama sent me to get you help." Nick laid the boy gently on a bedroll near the fire he'd built. "How are you feeling?" Samuel coughed, the sound rattling in his chest. "Hurts." "I know it does." Nick dampened a cloth in the cool creek water and placed it on the boy's forehead. "But we're going to fix that. You just rest now." He managed to coax a few sips of water into the child before Samuel drifted off again. As Nick prepared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, he found himself studying the boy's face. Samuel had his mother's delicate features, the same straight nose, the same curve to his lips, but his coloring was different sandy hair, where hers was chestnut, suggesting he took after his father in that regard. Nick thought of Beatrice standing in her doorway as they rode away, her face a mask of courage even as fear shone in her eyes. He'd noticed her before, of course. A woman alone, raising a child, working a homestead, she'd earned the respect of most folks in Silver Peak, though some, like Dr. Wells, looked down on her for refusing to remarry. Nick understood independence, and he understood loss. Perhaps that's why he'd been so quick to offer his help when the sheriff mentioned her situation. Or perhaps it was something else, something in the way her eyes held a person's gaze, direct and honest. He shook off these thoughts. What mattered now was getting Samuel to Silverton alive. The second day dawned clear and cold. Nick checked Samuel's fever and found it unchanged, not worse. But not better either. The boy's breathing remained labored, each breath a struggle that pained Nick to hear. "We're making good time, Samuel," he told the boy as he secured him for another day's ride. "By this time tomorrow, we'll be in Silverton, and the doctor there will know just what to do." Samuel didn't respond, lost in the grip of fever, but Nick kept talking anyway, describing the landscape as they rode, telling stories of his adventures in the mountains, anything to fill the silence and give the boy something to hold on to. They pushed harder that day, stopping only when necessary. By nightfall, Nick estimated they'd covered nearly 40 miles, good progress, but not enough. Samuel's condition was deteriorating. The cough had worsened, and now a bluish tinge colored his lips when he struggled for breath. Nick made camp with a growing sense of dread. He'd seen this before in the war, in the camps where disease had often claimed more lives than bullets. Pneumonia was a merciless enemy. He built the fire larger that night, hoping the warmth would ease Samuel's breathing. As he sat beside the boy, spooning broth between his cracked lips, Nick found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, praying. "You hang on, Samuel," he whispered when he'd finished. "Your mama's waiting for you, and she's the kind of woman worth fighting for, isn't she?" The third day broke with an ominous sky, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain. Nick packed camp quickly, his movements efficient but gentle as he prepared Samuel for the final leg of their journey. Just a few more hours, he assured the boy, who seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than when they'd started. "You're doing so well, Samuel. Just a little longer." They set out as the first raindrops began to fall, fat droplets that quickly turned to a steady downpour. Nick covered Samuel with an oilskin, trying to keep him dry, but the mountain trails quickly turned treacherous, slowing their progress. By midday, the storm had intensified, thunder rolling through the valleys as lightning split the sky. Nick pressed on, one hand steadying Samuel, the other guiding his horse through the increasingly dangerous terrain. A flash of lightning spooked the mare, causing her to rear suddenly. Nick controlled his own mount, but the jolt was enough to wake Samuel, who began to cough violently, his little body convulsing with the effort. "Easy, easy," Nick soothed, pulling his horse to a stop under the shelter of a large pine. He dismounted quickly, lifting Samuel down and supporting him as the coughing fit continued. When it finally subsided, Samuel collapsed against him, exhausted. Nick felt for the boy's pulse and found it racing beneath his fingertips, too fast, too weak. "No," he muttered. "Not now. We're too close." Silverton was still hours away. Hours Samuel might not have. Nick looked around desperately, searching for options in the rain-lashed landscape. Then he remembered there was a mining outpost not far from here, just off the main trail. It wasn't much, just a few buildings where supplies were stored, but sometimes the company doctor stayed there when checking on the more remote claims. It was a gamble, but it was closer than Silverton. "Change of plans, Samuel," Nick said, mounting again with the boy secure against his chest. "We're going to find help sooner." He turned off the main trail, guiding his horse through a narrow pass that he knew led to the outpost. The rain continued to fall, turning the path into a muddy stream, but Nick pushed on, driven by the increasingly labored sound of Samuel's breathing. After what seemed like an eternity, the outpost came into view, 3 sturdy buildings huddled against the mountainside, smoke rising from one chimney despite the weather. "Thank God," Nick breathed, urging his tired horse toward the largest building. As they approached, the door opened and a man stepped out, squinting through the rain at the unexpected visitors. "Hello there," the man called. "Bad day for traveling." "Need help," Nick shouted back, his voice nearly lost in a clap of thunder. "Got a sick child here." The man hurried forward, helping Nick dismount with Samuel. As they moved into the light spilling from the doorway, Nick saw the man more clearly middle-aged, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Bring him inside," the man directed, leading the way into a warm room dominated by a large fireplace. "I'm Dr. Harrison, company physician." Relief washed over Nick in a wave so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. "The boy has pneumonia, been riding 3 days from Silver Peak to find help." Dr. Harrison was already examining Samuel, his experienced hands gentle but thorough. 3 days in this weather, with a child this sick? You're either very brave or very foolish, friend." His mother had no choice. Town doctor refused to see him. The doctor's eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment, focusing instead on Samuel's chest as he listened with a stethoscope. "Severe congestion in both lungs, high fever. He's a very sick little boy." He looked up at Nick. "But you got him here in time. We can treat this." Nick sagged into a chair, the tension of the past 3 days finally catching up to him. "Thank God." "You'll need to tell me about the symptoms, when they started, what treatments have already been tried," Dr. Harrison said, as he began pulling bottles from a medical bag. "I can tell you what his mother told me," Nick said, "but I've only been with him these past 3 days." "And you're not his father?" "No, just a friend of the family." Dr. Harrison paused, studying Nick with new interest. "Must be quite a friendship to risk your life in weather like this." Nick didn't know how to respond to that. Was it friendship that had driven him to make this journey? He wasn't sure what to call the feeling that had compelled him to help Beatrice Taylor, this woman he barely knew. "His mother's a good woman," he said finally. "She didn't deserve to lose her son because she couldn't pay a doctor's fee." Dr. Harrison nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, let's make sure she doesn't have to." He turned back to Samuel, who stirred slightly under his touch. "Hello there, young man. I'm Dr. Harrison. We're going to get you feeling better." As the doctor worked, preparing medicines and treatments, Nick found himself thinking of Beatrice again. By now, she would be wild with worry, having no way to know if they'd made it to Silverton, if Samuel was receiving the care he needed. He wished there was some way to send word, to ease her mind. "Your friend will need to stay here for at least a few days," Dr. Harrison said, breaking into Nick's thoughts. "His condition is too delicate for travel just yet." "Whatever he needs," Nick agreed readily. "And you look like you could use some rest yourself." The doctor gestured to a door. "There's another room through there with a couple of bunks. The mining company keeps this place stocked for emergencies. Make yourself at home." Nick hesitated, looking at Samuel. "He'll sleep through the night with the medicine I've given him," Dr. Harrison assured him. "And I'll be right here." Nodding gratefully, Nick retreated to the indicated room. He stripped off his wet clothes and collapsed onto one of the bunks, exhaustion claiming him almost instantly. He dreamed of Beatrice, her eyes filled with tears as she handed over her son, her voice calling his name. In the dream, he promised to return to her, promised to bring her son home safely. It was a promise he intended to keep. The days that followed passed in a blur for Beatrice. She moved through her chores mechanically, her mind constantly straying to the mountain trails, imagining Nick and Samuel battling the elements, racing against time. The thunderstorm that had swept through on the third day had nearly broken her. She'd stood at her window, watching lightning split the sky, thinking of her son out there in that fury, and had nearly collapsed from the weight of her fear. Sheriff Thomas continued to check on her, bringing news when he could, which wasn't much. No word had come from Silverton, but that wasn't unusual given the distances involved. "No news is good news," he'd say, trying to comfort her. "If anything had happened, we'd have heard." On the fourth day, Martha from the general store stopped by with a basket of food and a sympathetic ear. She sat with Beatrice at her kitchen table, pouring tea and offering the kind of company only another woman could provide. "Nicholas Jameson's a good man," Martha said, stirring sugar into her cup. "My Henry says he's the best horseman he's ever seen, and Henry doesn't give praise lightly." "I hardly know him," Beatrice admitted. "We've spoken maybe a dozen times since he came to town." Martha's eyes twinkled. "And yet, he rode off into the wilderness with your son. That says something, doesn't it?" Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "It says he's kind, nothing more." Martha sipped her tea, unconvinced. "Well, kind men are rare enough these days. And handsome ones who are still unmarried even rarer." "Martha," Beatrice protested, though there was a smile in her voice for the first time in days. "I'm just saying, when he brings your boy back, and he will, you might consider thanking him properly." Martha's smile was mischievous. "Perhaps with one of those apple pies you're famous for." The suggestion was innocent enough, but it stirred something in Beatrice, a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea she was drinking. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on what mattered. Samuel's safe return was all she could allow herself to hope for now. By the fifth day, Beatrice had worn a path in her floor from pacing. They should be on their way back by now, if all had gone well in Silverton. If Samuel had received treatment, if he was strong enough to travel, so many ifs. She was in her garden, aggressively pulling weeds as if they were personally responsible for her troubles, when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Dropping her trowel, she stood, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun as she peered down the path that led to her homestead. 2 riders appeared through the trees, no one rider leading a second horse. Her heart leapt into her throat. It was Nick, his broad-shouldered silhouette, unmistakable even at a distance. But where was Samuel? Then she saw the bundle secured before him on the saddle, a small figure wrapped in blankets. Beatrice ran, her skirts gathered in her hands, feet flying over the uneven ground, her heart pounding with fear and hope in equal measure. As she drew closer, Nick reined in his horse, his face breaking into a smile that told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke. "Look who's feeling better, Samuel," Nick said to the bundle. "It's your mama." The blankets shifted, and Samuel's face appeared, pale but alert, his eyes finding hers. "Mama!" A sob tore from Beatrice's throat as Nick carefully handed her son down to her waiting arms. Samuel was lighter than she remembered, frailer, but he was alive and awake, his arms wrapping around her neck as she held him close. "My boy, my beautiful boy," she murmured into his hair, tears streaming down her face. "I've missed you so much." "I was real sick, Mama," Samuel said, his voice still raspy but stronger than when he'd left. "But Mr. Nick found a doctor, and he gave me medicine that tasted awful. But it made my chest stop hurting." Beatrice looked up at Nick, still mounted on his horse, watching their reunion with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. "I can never repay you for this." Nick dismounted, his movements stiff after the long ride. "No repayment necessary, Mrs. Taylor. The doctor in Silverton sends his regards, by the way." "You didn't go to Silverton?" Surprise colored her voice. "We had to change plans. There was a storm, and Samuel was getting worse." Nick ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. "We found help at a mining outpost about halfway to Silverton. Company doctor named Harrison was there. Good man. He treated Samuel, let us stay until the boy was strong enough to travel. Harrison said I was the bravest patient he ever had," Samuel declared proudly. "That you were," Nick agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Didn't complain once, even when the medicine tasted like old boots." Beatrice hugged her son closer, overwhelmed by gratitude. "Please, come inside. You must be exhausted, and I want to hear everything." She paused. "And I owe you a proper thank you." Nick smiled, the weariness in his eyes lifting slightly. "I won't say no to that. It's been a long ride home." Home? The word struck Beatrice oddly. Silver Peak was home to her, and Samuel, but she hadn't thought Nick considered it as such. He'd always seemed like a man just passing through, someone who might drift on to the next town when the mood struck him. Inside the cabin, she settled Samuel on his bed with strict instructions to rest, though he protested that he'd been resting for days and was tired of it. Finally, he agreed to stay put if Nick would tell him a story later about his adventures. "You've got a deal, partner," Nick promised, and Samuel beamed. In the kitchen, Beatrice busied herself making coffee, acutely aware of Nick's presence at her table. He'd removed his hat and coat, and she noticed for the first time a long scar that ran along his forearm, visible where he'd rolled up his sleeves. "The doctor gave me instructions for Samuel's care," Nick said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "He needs to finish this medicine 1 spoonful morning and night for the next week, and he should stay warm and rest for at least another few days, even if he says he feels better." Beatrice took the paper, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. "And the bill?" she asked quietly. "How much do I owe for the doctor's services?" Nick's expression softened. "Nothing. It's taken care of." "What? No, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. It's done." His tone was gentle but firm. Dr. Harrison refused payment anyway, said helping the boy was payment enough. Beatrice sat down across from him, emotion threatening to overwhelm her again. "I don't know what to say. You've done so much, risked so much." "Anyone would have done the same," Nick said, though they both knew that wasn't true. No one else had offered to make that journey when Samuel's life hung in the balance. "The sheriff told me about your family," Beatrice said softly, "that you lost them to fever during the war." Nick's face stilled, his eyes dropping to his coffee cup. "Thomas talks too much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." She hesitated. "But I think I understand now why you were so determined to help Samuel." For a long moment, Nick was silent. Then, his voice low, he said, "My son, William, was about Samuel's age. It was dysentery that took him and my wife, Elizabeth. The camp doctors were overwhelmed, couldn't treat everyone. By the time one could see them..." He trailed off, the old pain evident in his voice. "I'm so sorry," Beatrice whispered. Nick looked up, meeting her eyes. "When I heard about Samuel, when I heard that the doctor refused to help because of money, I couldn't let it happen again. Not when I could do something about it." Understanding passed between them, deep and wordless. Beatrice reached across the table, her hand covering his. "You saved my son's life." There are no words for that kind of gratitude. Nick turned his hand, his fingers closing around hers. "Seeing you hold him again is all the thanks I need." The moment stretched between them, something new and fragile taking shape in the air. Then, from the bedroom, Samuel called out, "Mr. Nick, you promised me a story." The spell broken, they both smiled, Nick releasing her hand reluctantly. "Duty calls," he said, rising from the table. "He adores you already," Beatrice observed, standing as well. "He's a good kid. You've done well with him." Nick paused at the bedroom door, looking back at her. "I should check on the horses, then I'll need to head back to the ranch. Mr. Peterson's probably wondering where I've been." The sheriff explained everything to him, Beatrice assured him. "But you don't have to go right away. Stay for supper at least. It's the least I can do." Nick hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Later, after Samuel had been entertained with tales of Nick's adventures, carefully edited for a child's ears, and had finally fallen asleep, Beatrice and Nick sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in the gold and crimson. "Will you tell me about him?" Nick asked suddenly. "About your husband?" The question surprised her, but Beatrice found she didn't mind. "Daniel was a good man, a dreamer. He came west because he believed there was opportunity here, a chance to build something of our own." She smiled at the memory. "We met in St. Louis. I was working in my father's bookshop, and Daniel came in looking for maps of the Western Territories. He started coming back every day, claiming he needed more information for his journey. It took me 2 weeks to realize he was really coming back to see me." "Smart man," Nick commented. "We were married 3 months later and headed west the day after the wedding. My parents thought I was mad, following a man I barely knew to a wilderness they couldn't even imagine." She sighed. "Sometimes I thought they might be right, especially those first few months. Life out here was harder than either of us expected. But you stayed." "We stayed. Daniel wasn't one to give up easily. We made it work. Built this place together, had Samuel." Her voice softened. "We were happy." "What happened?" Nick asked gently. "Mining accident, a tunnel collapse at the Silver Queen mine, Daniel and 3 other men." Beatrice looked out at the mountains, remembering. "That was 2 years ago. Everyone said I should sell up, move back east to my family, or at least move into town, find another husband. But you're still here. This is our home mine and Samuel's. Daniel put his heart into this place. I couldn't just leave it." She turned to look at him. "And I don't need a husband to survive. I've managed just fine on my own." "More than fine," Nick agreed, admiration clear in his voice. "Most men I know couldn't run a homestead half as well as you do." His praise warmed her. "What about you? Will you stay in Silver Peak? Or are you just passing through?" Nick considered this, his gaze on the distant peaks. "I've been moving for a long time. After Elizabeth and William died, I couldn't stay in one place. Too many memories." He paused. "But lately, I've been thinking it might be time to stop running." "And Silver Peak feels right for that?" Beatrice asked, trying to keep her tone casual. A smile touched his lips. "It's starting to." The next morning, Nick came by to check on Samuel before heading back to the Peterson ranch. The boy was sitting up in bed, color returned to his cheeks, eager to show Nick the wooden horse he'd carved for him. "It's not very good," Samuel said shyly. "But Mama says you're the best horse rider in the whole territory, so you should have a horse of your own." Nick took the rough carving, turning it over in his hands with genuine appreciation. "This is mighty fine work, Samuel. Thank you." He tucked it carefully into his pocket. "I'll keep it with me always." Beatrice watched from the doorway, her heart full at the scene. When Nick finally took his leave, promising to visit again soon, she walked with him to his horse. "Will you really come back?" she asked as he mounted up. Nick looked down at her, his blue eyes serious. "Try and stop me." Over the following weeks, Nick became a regular visitor at the Taylor homestead. He came bearing gifts: a repaired fence post here, a load of chopped firewood there, always dismissing Beatrice's protests that he was doing too much. "I like being useful," he'd say with a shrug, "and it gives me an excuse to see how the patient is doing." Samuel thrived under Nick's attention, following him around the property, peppering him with questions about horses and adventures. To Beatrice's delight, Nick answered each query with patience, taking time to show the boy how to mend a bridle or identify animal tracks in the dust. One evening in late summer, as Beatrice and Nick sat on her porch after Samuel had gone to bed, she finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why are you doing all this, Nick? Not that I don't appreciate it, but you've done more than enough to repay any debt you might have felt." Nick was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. "I'm not repaying a debt, Beatrice." "Then what?" He turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I'm building something, or trying to." "Building what?" "A future, here, with—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "With people who matter to me." Her heart quickened. "And we matter to you, Samuel and I?" "More than I expected, more than I thought possible again." Nick's voice was low. "Earnest. I know it hasn't been long. I know you've made a life for yourself here, a good one. But I can't stop thinking about you, Beatrice. About both of you." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Beatrice found herself at a loss for words, her feelings a complex tangle she couldn't immediately sort through. "I'm not asking for anything," Nick continued when she didn't respond. "Just permission to keep coming around, to be a part of your lives, whatever form that takes." Beatrice looked at him, this man who had ridden through storms to save her son, who had brought laughter back to her home, who looked at her with such warmth in his eyes. She realized with sudden clarity that she'd been holding part of herself back, afraid to trust, afraid to hope for more than survival. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." The smile that spread across Nick's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he reached for her hand. When she twined her fingers with his, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. In the weeks that followed, Silver Peak buzzed with gossip about the developing relationship between the widow Taylor and the cowboy Jameson. Most found it a heartwarming tale, especially given how it had begun with Nick's heroic ride to save young Samuel. A few, like Dr. Wells, sniffed disapprovingly at what they deemed improper haste, but their voices were largely ignored. Nick continued his work at the Peterson Ranch, but spent almost every evening at the Taylor homestead. He and Beatrice moved cautiously at first, both aware of the watching eyes of the community and of Samuel, who had grown increasingly attached to Nick. One Sunday after church, Martha cornered Beatrice while the men were outside discussing the recent gold strike near Silverton. "Well?" Martha prodded, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "When are you going to make it official?" Beatrice feigned ignorance. "Make what official?" "Oh, don't play coy with me, Beatrice Taylor. That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. And don't think I haven't noticed how you light up when he walks into a room." Heat rose to Beatrice's cheeks. "It's complicated." "Doesn't look complicated to me. Looks like two people who deserve some happiness after a fair share of sorrow." Martha's expression softened. "Life's too short to waste time, my dear. Especially out here." Beatrice knew her friend was right. She and Nick had been dancing around the growing feelings between them, neither quite ready to put them into words. But lately, she'd found herself imagining a future where Nick was more than just a regular visitor, where he was a permanent part of her life, of Samuel's life. The opportunity to speak of these thoughts came unexpectedly the following Saturday. Nick had arrived early, bringing with him a young mare he'd been training. "She's gentle as they come," he told Samuel, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "Perfect for a boy your age to learn on." "Is she for me?" Samuel asked, his eyes wide. Nick glanced at Beatrice, seeking her approval. "If your mama agrees, I thought I could teach you to ride properly." "Every man in these parts needs to know how to handle a horse." Samuel turned pleading eyes to his mother. "Please, Mama, please say yes." Beatrice hesitated, maternal worry warring with the knowledge that Nick was right. Samuel would need to learn sooner or later. "She does look gentle," she conceded, "and I trust Nick to teach you safely." "Yes!" Samuel pumped his fist in the air, then threw his arms around Nick's waist in a fierce hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Nick, looking surprised but pleased, returned the embrace. "You're welcome, partner. We'll take it nice and slow, I promise." Beatrice watched as Nick patiently showed Samuel how to approach the horse, how to offer his hand for her to sniff, how to speak in soft, reassuring tones. The care he took with her son, the gentle guidance he offered, made something catch in her throat. Later, after Samuel had been allowed a short ride around the yard with Nick leading the mare, and had gone inside to wash up for lunch, Beatrice found herself alone with Nick by the corral. "That was a generous gift," she said, watching as he rubbed down the mare. Too generous, really? Nick shook his head. Not at all. She's a good horse, but too small for ranch work. Mr. Peterson was looking to sell her anyway. He paused. I hope you're not upset I didn't ask you first. No, Beatrice assured him. I'm grateful. Samuel has needed something like this. Something to look forward to. Something that's just his. He's a good kid, smart too. He'll make a fine horseman with a little practice. They fell into comfortable silence. The autumn breeze rustling the golden leaves of the aspens that dotted the property. Beatrice gathered her courage, Martha's words echoing in her mind. Life's too short to waste time. Nick, she began, I've been thinking, there's something I need to ask you, he said simultaneously. They both stopped, then laughed. You first, Beatrice offered. Nick set down the brush he'd been using on the mare and turned to face her fully. His expression was serious, nervous even. I've been offered a partnership in the Peterson ranch. Nick, that's wonderful, Beatrice exclaimed, genuinely pleased for him. Old Peterson's looking to step back, take life a bit easier. His sons have all gone east, aren't interested in ranching. He needs someone who knows horses, someone who can help run the place. Nick ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of his uncertainty. It's a good opportunity. Means I'd be staying in Silver Peak for good. That sounds like a decision you've already made, Beatrice observed carefully. Almost. Nick stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. There's just one thing that would make it perfect. Beatrice's heart fluttered in her chest. And what's that? You, Beatrice. You and Samuel. His voice dropped, sincere and a little raw. I know it hasn't been that long, and I know you value your independence. This place is yours, built with your own hands and Daniel's. I wouldn't ask you to give that up, but, she prompted when he hesitated. But I love you, both of you, and I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. The words, so simply spoken, filled her with a warmth that spread from her heart outward. Nick Jameson loved her. This man who had come into their lives like a whirlwind, who had saved her son, who had slowly and steadily worked his way into both their hearts. Nick, she began, then found she couldn't continue, emotion closing her throat. Misreading her silence, Nick stepped back slightly. I understand if it's too soon, or if you don't feel the same way. I just wanted you to know, before I gave Peterson my answer. Beatrice closed the distance between them, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. I was about to tell you that I've been thinking about us, about a future together. She smiled up at him. I think we've been headed toward this moment since the day you rode out of here with Samuel. Hope dawned in Nick's eyes. Is that a yes? It's a yes, Beatrice confirmed. I love you too, Nick. And so does Samuel. I think he's loved you since you brought him home to me. The joy that transformed Nick's face was a sight to behold. Slowly, reverently, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. May I? He whispered. In answer, Beatrice rose up on her tiptoes, meeting his lips with her own. The kiss was tender at first, a tentative exploration, then deepened as they both gave in to feelings that had been building for months. When they finally parted, Nick kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. I never thought I'd find this again, he murmured, a chance at family, at happiness. Neither did I, Beatrice admitted. After Daniel died, I thought that part of my life was over. I focused on Samuel, on survival. You did more than survive, Nick said. You thrived. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Beatrice Taylor. He kissed her again, briefly. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be a father to Samuel, not to replace Daniel, but to be another parent who loves him. He already thinks of you that way, Beatrice assured him. You should hear how he talks about you when you're not here. Mr. Nick showed me how to tie a special knot. Mr. Nick says a man always keeps his word, she smiled. You've already made your mark on his heart. Nick's eyes shone with emotion. Then, there's only one thing left to do. Before Beatrice could ask what he meant, Nick stepped back and, to her astonishment, lowered himself to one knee before her. From his pocket, he produced a small, simple ring, a band of silver with a modest pearl set at its center. Beatrice Taylor, he said formally, though his voice trembled slightly. would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" For the second time that day, Beatrice found herself speechless. The ring caught the sunlight, gleaming with promise. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was perfect, honest, and true, like the man offering it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Nick Jameson, I will marry you." With a grin that could have lit the darkest night, Nick slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed in delight. They were still embracing when a small voice called from the porch, "Mama, Mr. Nick, is lunch ready yet? I'm starving." They separated reluctantly, both smiling at Samuel's impeccable timing. "Should we tell him?" Nick asked. Beatrice nodded. Together, hand in hand, they walked to the porch where Samuel waited, impatient and hungry after his morning's adventure. Beatrice knelt before her son, Nick at her side. "Samuel," she began, "Mr. Nick and I have something important to tell you." The boy looked between them, curiosity replacing his hunger momentarily. "What is it?" "Mr. Nick has asked me to marry him," Beatrice said gently, "and I've said yes. That means he would come to live here with us, and he would be your father. Not to replace your real father," she hastened to add, "but to be another parent who loves you." Samuel's eyes widened, his gaze shifting to Nick. "You'd be my pa?" Nick nodded, his expression serious. "If that's all right with you, Samuel, I know I could never take the place of your real father, but I'd be honored to help raise you, to teach you what I know, and to learn from you, too." For a long, heart-stopping moment, Samuel said nothing, his young face scrunched in thought. Then, with the beautiful directness of children, he asked, "Would I call you Pa instead of Mr. Nick?" Nick's voice was rough with emotion. "If you wanted to, or you could keep calling me Nick, whatever feels right to you." Samuel considered this, then nodded decisively. "I think I'd like to call you Pa, and I think my real father would be okay with that, because Mama says he'd want us to be happy, and you make us happy." Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes at her son's simple wisdom. Nick didn't even try to hide his own emotion, gathering the boy into a fierce hug. "Thank you, Samuel. That means the world to me." Samuel returned the embrace, then pulled back with a practical question. "Does this mean we get to keep the horse?" The adults burst into laughter, the solemn moment giving way to joy. "Yes," Nick confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. "The mare is yours, to care for and to learn on." "And now," Beatrice added, rising to her feet, "let's have that lunch before we all waste away." As they moved inside, the autumn sunlight warming the small cabin, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was not the life she had planned when she and Daniel had first come west, but it was a good life, a life filled with love, with promise, with the family she had made and remade through hardship and joy. Nick and Beatrice were married 2 weeks later in Silver Peak's small church, with Samuel standing proudly at Nick's side as his best man. The whole town turned out for the celebration, even Dr. Wells, though he remained on the periphery, uncomfortable with the reminder of his failure to help when needed. After the ceremony, as guests gathered at the Peterson Ranch for the wedding feast, Sheriff Thomas pulled Nick aside for a moment. "You did good, son," he said, clapping Nick on the shoulder. "For her, for the boy, and for yourself." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nick replied, "though I think I'm the one who got the better end of this deal." Thomas chuckled. "That may be so, but don't you forget it. A good woman is a treasure beyond price." His eyes drifted to his own wife, chatting animatedly with Beatrice across the room. "I speak from experience. I won't forget," Nick promised. Not for a single day. The newlyweds settled into life together with surprising ease. Nick moved his few possessions to the Taylor homestead, which they agreed would remain their home, with the Peterson Ranch partnership providing additional income and security. Winter came early that year, the mountains disappearing beneath a blanket of snow by mid-November. The cabin, which had sometimes seemed too small for just Beatrice and Samuel, now felt perfect with Nick's presence filling the spaces that had been empty for too long. On a particularly cold evening in December, as a blizzard howled outside their windows, the small family sat around the fireplace, Nick teaching Samuel to play checkers while Beatrice mended a shirt by lamplight. "Your move, partner," Nick said, watching as Samuel studied the board with intense concentration. The The boy moved his piece, then looked up with a grin. "King me, Pa," Nick obliged, placing another red checker atop Samuel's piece. "Well played. You're getting too good at this game." Samuel beamed at the praise. "Can we go riding tomorrow if the snow stops?" "If your mother says it's all right, and if the snow isn't too deep." Nick glanced at Beatrice, who nodded her approval. "Just bundle up properly," she added. "I don't want either of you catching cold out there." The domesticity of the scene struck Nick suddenly this simple evening, this family that was now his, this love that had found him when he least expected it. He watched as Beatrice set aside her mending to pour them all cups of hot chocolate, her movements graceful in the firelight, the wedding band on her finger catching the glow from the flames. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching him watching her. "How lucky I am," he answered honestly. "How perfect this is." Beatrice smiled, a private smile just for him. "It is, isn't it?" Later, after Samuel had been tucked into bed, Nick and Beatrice sat together on the small sofa near the fire, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her. "I have something to tell you," she said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on his hand. Nick was relaxed, content, the warmth of her against him a constant wonder. Beatrice shifted, looking up at him with an expression that was both shy and joyful. "I'm going to have a baby." The words took a moment to register, then Nick sat up straighter, turning to face her fully. "A baby? You're sure?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Harrison confirmed it when we were in town yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you." "Dr. Harrison?" Nick repeated, his mind still catching up. "You went to him instead of Wells?" "After what happened with Samuel, I wouldn't trust that man to treat a hangnail," Beatrice said firmly. "Besides, Dr. Harrison has been riding circuit through Silver Peak every few weeks since he treated Samuel. He's a good doctor, and he remembers what you did for my son." "Our son," Nick corrected automatically, then returned to the more important news. "We're having a baby?" The wonder in his voice made Beatrice laugh. "Yes, Nick, we're having a baby. In about 6 months, according to Dr. Harrison." 6 months, Nick repeated, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby?" He looked up at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I never thought I'd be a father again. After William." "I know," Beatrice said softly, covering his hand with her own. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Nick pulled her close, overwhelmed with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for this second chance, for our family." "Thank you for saving Samuel," she replied, "for riding 3 days through the wilderness to bring him help, for coming into our lives when we needed you most." They held each other as the fire burned low and the storm raged outside, secure in the warmth of their home and their love. Spring came to the mountains, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land. Beatrice's pregnancy progressed steadily, her body rounding with the child growing within. Samuel, excited about his role as big brother, helped Nick prepare the second bedroom, which would now be the baby's room, while Samuel moved to a new space Nick had added onto the cabin during the winter months. In early June, as wildflowers carpeted the meadows around their homestead, Beatrice went into labor. Nick sent Samuel to fetch Dr. Harrison, who had been staying in town specifically for this purpose, while he remained at Beatrice's side, holding her hand through each contraction. "You're doing beautifully," he assured her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "Just like you do everything else?" Beatrice managed a smile between pains. "Flatterer?" Dr. Harrison arrived quickly, his manner calm and confident as he examined Beatrice. "Everything looks perfect, Mrs. Jameson. This baby is in a hurry to meet its family." He was right. After just 4 hours of labor, half the time it took with Samuel, Beatrice noted with relief their daughter was born, announcing her arrival with a lusty cry that brought tears to Nick's eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered as Dr. Harrison placed the swaddled infant in Beatrice's arms. "Perfect." Beatrice looked down at their daughter, taking in the shock of dark hair, the tiny fists that waved in protest at the bright world she'd entered. "She is, isn't she?" "What will you name her?" Dr. Harrison asked as he tidied his instruments. Nick and Beatrice exchanged a look. They'd discussed names but hadn't settled on one, waiting to see their child first. "Elizabeth," Beatrice said suddenly, watching Nick's face carefully. After her father's first wife. If that's all right? Nick's expression softened with gratitude and love. Elizabeth, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. It's perfect. Elizabeth Taylor Jameson. When Samuel was allowed in to meet his sister, he approached the bed with unusual caution, his eyes wide as he peered at the small bundle in his mother's arms. She's so tiny, he whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's hand. Elizabeth immediately grasped his finger in her tiny fist, bringing a look of wonder to Samuel's face. She's holding my hand, Ma. She knows her big brother, Nick said, his hand on Samuel's shoulder. She's going to need you to help look after her, teach her things. Samuel nodded solemnly. I will, I promise. As the family gathered around the newest member, Dr. Harrison slipped quietly from the room, leaving them to their private joy. Outside, he found Martha and several other townspeople waiting anxiously for news. A healthy girl, he announced with a smile. Mother and child are doing splendidly. A cheer went up from the small crowd, and Martha wiped a tear from her eye. A fitting end to their story, wouldn't you say, Doctor? Dr. Harrison considered this, thinking of the desperate ride through the mountains that had brought Nick Jameson into his outpost months ago, of the fever-stricken boy he'd treated, of the love that had grown from that crisis. Not an end, Mrs. Peterson, he corrected gently. A beginning. Inside the cabin, as twilight settled over Silver Peak, Beatrice watched as Nick cradled their daughter, his expression one of pure adoration as he whispered promises to the tiny girl. Samuel had dozed off beside her on the bed, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Happy? Nick asked, looking up to find her watching him. Completely, she answered truthfully. Though I never would have predicted this a year ago. Nick smiled, remembering their journey to this moment. When I rode out with Samuel that day, I was just trying to save a child's life. I had no idea I was riding toward my own future, toward the family I thought I'd lost forever. And I was just a desperate mother, watching a stranger ride away with my son, praying he'd bring him back alive. Beatrice reached out, taking his hand. I had no idea you'd bring back so much more. Nick leaned over, careful not to disturb the sleeping infant in his arms, and kissed his wife gently. I love you, Beatrice Jameson. And I love you, Nicholas Jameson. She smiled against his lips. Thank you for riding 3 days to save our son, for giving us this life together. Outside their window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, shining down on Silver Peak, on the small cabin where a family had been formed through courage, kindness, and a love that had begun with one man's determination to right a wrong, to save a child, to make a difference when it mattered most. And as night fell over the mountains, Nick Jameson held his daughter close and watched his wife and stepson sleeping peacefully, knowing that the journey that had brought him here, the desperate ride through wilderness, the battles with storm and fever, the slow building of trust and love had been the most important journey of his life. A journey not of distance, but of the heart. A journey home.